Boom, 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 boom. Ooh, yeah, yeah. Boom, 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 boom. They say it's alright. Boom, boom, boom. They say it's alright. Boom, boom, boom. Say it's alright. Have a good time. Cause it's alright. Whoa, it's alright. Now we gonna move it slow. Up in the lights low.
Hello and welcome. I'm inside. You're inside. We're all inside. This is Chor Leoni Inside. I'm Erick Light, Artistic Director of Chor Leoni, and it's great to have you with us again for this week's episode. Now 2 months into this quarantining business, and we're starting to get the hang of this show, even though we had a few technical issues here and there, but we'll muddle through. I want to thank you again for being with us. We have a really wonderful show. This is the first time we've just focused on one composer, the Estonian composer Veljo Tormis. And my guest for this week is one of my favorite choral conductors that I know of. Is the conductor of the Rutgers Glee Club, Patrick Gardner. But before we get into all of this, I want to have a wonderful thank you to Blue Shore Financial for being the series sponsor. They have been wonderful supporters of Chor Leoni for many years now, and we hope for many years to come. And I also want to thank Tom Kidd, who is sponsoring this very episode of Chor Leoni Inside. We do have individual sponsorship opportunities. It does take quite a bit to get this show going every single week, and we want to thank Tom from the bottom of our hearts. We love you, sir. And if you're interested in sponsoring an episode of Chor Leoni Inside, you can contact info@chorleoni.org and let Stash Berlitsky, our executive director, know, and we'd be happy to be helped. Now on to the focus of our show, Veljo Tormis, probably my favorite, one of my favorite 20th century composers of all time, especially since I've made most of my mark in the world of male choral music. I don't know of anyone who has pushed the boundaries of choral music with male choral writing as much as he has. A little bit of biography. I could go on and on for this guy, about this guy forever, but I will leave you to some Googling if you want to fill in some gaps. But Veljo Tormis was born in a town just outside of Tallinn, Estonia, on the shore there in 1930. And at age of 9, the Soviets took over Estonia and began, as they did with many of their satellites, a system of oppression of those indigenous cultures and languages. And Tormis was becoming a formative musician. He was an organist and a choir master. Then went on into studying composition after, frankly, the organ was taken away from him as a possibility because of all of the religious connotations in the Soviet Union. So he began his studies and came back to Estonia, and pretty much, in my opinion, revolutionized how folk music and concert music could be put together in new ways, and very much was a part of the maintaining and the sustaining of the Estonian culture and language and folk songs and stories through these incredible concert works. I don't think there's really been a story quite like that in the world of choral music, of how music at such a high level has also had such incredible roots and allowed a culture to hold on through a regime that held on to them through most of the 20th century. I want to play, though, a piece that really kind of speaks to what Tormis is about. This is a work called Laulja, which means the singer, and it's funnily enough scored for male choir, cymbal, bass drum, and pipe organ, and with Veljo Tormis's first instrument being the pipe organ. The text of this is quite extraordinary. I'll read it for you. Like a source of light, the honorable singer sings amongst his brothers. The thunder crashes and the woods are still. The singer is about to raise his voice. And around him, still as the rocks, peoples are listening. And I think when you listen to this, it starts with this extraordinary pianissimo singing from the choir in unison. and goes into one of the most earth-shattering fortes. I highly encourage you to put those headphones on, turn those subwoofers up, and please enjoy Laulia by Veljo Tormis. Chor Leoni singing at the 2017 Van Man Male Choral Summit, where Chanticleer was there. Ellen Wang playing organ there for us, and what an angel. That is Laulia by Veljo Tormis. Just what a piece. It makes quite a statement. Another guy that's made quite a statement, and somebody I want to bring in here is, and welcome to the show, Mr. Patrick Gardner. Oh, Patrick, where are you?
I'm
Hello
right
there. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Eric? Who got
I'm
to
just
play the
fine.
cymbals, right? I want to.
Sorry, say that again.
Who got to play the cymbals? I love that cymbal crash in Laulia.
The cymbal player was none other than Phil Jack, who is running this entire show. And we will hear
Phil,
from
way to go.
for a minute.
What a phenomenal piece.
It's yes, it is that symbol though is the cherry on the top, is it not? Yeah, it's wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us. We had just gotten off a conversation where Patrick and I went a bit deeper into his career and his thinkings about male choral music and all of his work that he's doing at Rutgers and with Riverside Choral Society. And I encourage all of you to check all of that out on our Further Inside piece, which will come up on YouTube on Thursday, tomorrow. But wonderfully inspiring things that he's saying there, and we'll play another amazing piece of Patrick's work on that show as well. But I want to dive, Patrick, right into Veljo Tormis. What's so extraordinary about this music, in your opinion? What sets it apart?
I think there's a combination of just this powerful sound. That this is a man who knew how to write for the voice, and the drive of each composition is amazing. But the subtext of each piece is incredible, and it all seems to so often come back to this sense of community and the Estonian people. What I love about Laulia, the piece that your group just performed so beautifully, is that buried in there is this amazing tune that every Estonian knows. If you go to YouTube and see the big singing festival, the Song Fest in Estonia, there's an amazing video there of literally thousands, it must be 20,000 people singing the tune that is the impetus for the piece Laulia.
It's that section, da 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 da. Yeah, that we sing wordlessly. Yeah.
And it's this piece, the singer, and of course, as we know, the singing revolution included an amazing moment when people held hands all the way from the capital of Lithuania to Tallinn, the capital of Estonia, singing that song, and it was an amazing singing protest. Right after the wall fell in Berlin, the revolution when Estonia broke away from the Soviet Union and the wall fell.
There haven't been that many stories in history where singing has held such an important part of really shaping a history of a people in a political landscape. And it's for those of you that have not ever seen the movie, The Singing Revolution is an absolute must if you have a pulse. It is just one of those an incredible story, and we'll go into all of this with great detail and footage and beautiful music to tell the story of the kind of the background of what we're talking about, and especially what happened right around the time in the early 90s as the Soviets went away from Estonia. So just wanted to encourage people for that. Patrick, I want to play a piece of yours, Vimane Live, and this is one I did not necessarily know. I know I'd heard it a while back, but could you give us maybe a bit of a deep dive into this piece, what it's about, and what to listen for?
Sure. It's the translation of Vimane Live is the last ship. And one thing to listen for is the various sections and how he presents the text. The piece is quite well known. If you type in Vimane Live, you'll find probably 10 different versions of it as a pop song. And Tormis has taken this piece, which once again was so important to the Estonian people. It's a combination of a look at someone's spiritual essence as it relates, I think, to not only his time on earth, but his time with his loved one. I will get my ship after I die, the lights of which I will never see myself. Before that, my darling, I got the sky and the blossoming earth from you. I can see all how the crop ripens, the land is happy and strange. The heart feels despair. I'm late, our way is not very long. I will not need a ship after I die. I beg of you while I'm alive. Don't ever chase me away. Be the last ship for me. So, of course, this image of the
Oh,
last, the funeral ship, the end of your life as you move on to the other life. I think what the poet Johann Schmuel is saying is that be that last ship. I, the part of eternity that I find in my life, I find in my oneness with you, my love. It's a very intense piece. You need the right singers up there to do this. It's very demanding vocally. The big triple forte section, about 2/3 of the way through, that keeps coming back, is pretty amazing. I'm lucky to work with such wonderful singers at Rutgers.
you are, and you guide them so well. Before we play this, I'd had somebody came to me once and said, "Oh, Veljo Tormis, he's more of an arranger than a composer." And yes, of course, he's taken a lot of existing material, but and many of it much more ancient than what we were just playing for these two pieces. But there's almost an orchestral hand at work with the choirs here, isn't there?
There is the sonority here. You can almost hear his organ training here, the huge homophonic sounds and the big registers. But no, this is not an arrangement. This is a deeply soulful treatment of an important tune as the basis of his composition, clearly.
Well, let's have a listen to it. This is Vimane Live, Veljo Tormis. Extraordinary. The Last Ship by Veljo Tormis. Patrick Gardner conducting the Rutgers Glee Club, and you just feel the immediacy, that the intensity of the writing there, don't you? Choral music meant something to Tormis, didn't it?
It did. It's a very intense setting, I think, and I love the way it moves through that. I love the middle part where you actually kind of can almost see and hear the oars being pulled after the heel ya in the middle, and the paras sumama comes back. The accompanying part, in rehearsal, we would just kind of feel the intensity of that motion as it builds to the triple fortes right after. It's very beautiful.
And so beautifully sung. What a wonderful palette. Never oversung, never undersung. Just a really gorgeous job. What a pleasure. I want to encourage everybody that's out there to, if you have questions or comments for Patrick, we will have a moment for that after we play our next piece. Patrick, you were alluding to this a little bit before, and I think this one element I think we have time to get into, the subtexts of Tormis's writing, of how there's maybe these coded messages or things that he's thumbing his nose at the authorities, and while all the time trying to keep his culture alive. Can you speak to that a little bit in the works of Tormis, and maybe the piece that we're going to hear next?
Certainly. Excuse me for a second. I just realized my computer's unplugged, and it's got a low battery. So,
really, it wouldn't be a Skype or Zoom meeting unless something like that happens.
So
I didn't have a fire alarm this week. So.
I think in much of Tormis's music, Lauli is a perfect example of that, where you think of this as just this folk song that's there, but it's not just a folk song. It's really I believe in that time period where he couldn't really speak out about the longings of the Estonian people to go back to being their own country, that using these songs that were so important to the Estonian people was a political statement. That the singer stands proud looking across the Baltics
peoples are listening is the last line. And who are those peoples? Yeah.
It's such a powerful statement. I think here with The Last Ship too, speaking to the ur of the people that lived in Estonia, and to the Ugric people, and to their own burial practices, and those certainly are something that can't be controlled. That history is there and can't be controlled. Of course, in other pieces like the Mistalau, he actually makes fun of Russians and makes fun of the drunken Russian going down the street, and kind of pushes the boundaries a little bit more in pieces that might just seem like they're all fun and games, but there's really a political statement that is there. The same with the Pizza Litania, when he goes back to an early form of Estonian. It's not truly in Estonian. And
let's talk about that, because we're going to play Litany to Thunder is what Patrick's speaking of, and this is one of those works. I mean, this is one of those tour de force pieces where you kind of stop breathing as an audience member watching it, and I absolutely love what you've done. Tell us a little bit about this piece in particular. Yeah.
Well, first I have to give a shout out to my student, Thomas Young, now alumnus Thomas Young, who's in the performance that you'll see. I went to Thomas, who's brilliant with theater and staging, and I don't want to call it choreography. It's just more like an intense movement. Yeah. But he did choreograph this. He did work this out. I had this vision that started with the circle at the end, when you'll see in the video when the tenor soloist is surrounded by the circle. But for the rest of it, there are times when Tormis gives instructions, some as specific as we joked about on Facebook yesterday with Clayton Parr, Barroom Brawl, right?
Barroom Brawl erupts, I believe, is
yeah. And the singer, he's got a couple of places where the chorus is given some very minimal instructions. to make a lot of noise and to sort of celebrate as if you're reaching out to the gods, asking for thunder and rain, because it's happening in the middle of a drought, and the community is reaching out asking for rain. But Thomas was so responsive and did, as you'll see, such a brilliant job, and then had to rearrange it in each space. As you'll see here, we're in the cathedral in Maastricht in the Netherlands, so that the physical movement, the physicality of the piece, the physical movement of our students could represent this intensity of community that we're trying to do here. And I think, again, it does relate to something that was so important about Tormis's sense of presenting what the community needs and wants, and in this case, the call for rain. Did you, Eric? Did you ever get a chance to see him perform as a percussionist with his?
No, and I never saw him do the drum for Curse Upon Iron. One of
I
my
saw him play the drum with Svanholt's Singer. I was not Curse Upon Iron, but it was another equally intense piece, and he just beat the heck out of that drum. And that choir was so inspired. I thought they were going to bite my kneecaps off. It was really intense. And I think seeing that at the IFCM conference in Denmark may have emboldened me a little to say, what the heck, this is the way I've always heard this piece, and I want to present it as more than just standing in a big row in our tuxedos up there. We're in our tuxedos because it's in the middle of a big concert, but as you can see, we're not just standing in a row with our soloists, Andrew Moore and Nick Petrosky here.
Well, this is Litany to Thunder. It is more or less almost a ceremony to bring rain upon a dry land. This is Patrick Gardner and the Rutgers Glee Club, not just singing but performing this amazing work.
Thank you.
Rutgers Glee Club, Patrick Gardner, Litany to Thunder, Veljo Tormis. My God. It's just one of those pieces. I was sitting. One of the thoughts that occurred to me is, most people will never get a chance to play Rite of Spring, but you don't need to if you can join a Glee club like that and sing that piece.
Interestingly, the score to that piece and Laulia were given to me in manuscript back in my first tour with the Rutgers University Glee Club, with 1995 or 96. And we had a rehearsal with what was then called the Estonian National Male Choir. It had morphed from the Army Choir, right? And is now the famous group of that name. But we sat in on a rehearsal with them and had a sort of a social hour with him. And the then conductor gave me several of Tormis's scores. And of course, in the early 90s, at the first IFCM conference, was when Tormis's music first started to be performed back here in America. So I was really happy to give the first performance of Laulia. And this piece is rarely performed. As you could tell, you need two soloists that can sing in parallel tritones up at the top of their register in a big operatic fashion. So I was so lucky to have Dick and Andrew that year.
They sound lovely. Yeah, they just sound great. And who knew that again another piece written on a tritone would be just so utterly engrossing and amazing. It's really striking. I want to bring in Phil Jack, our producer for this show, into the mix here and see if. Hello, Phil.
Hello, Eric. Hello, Patrick.
Hi, Phil.
Just wondering if there are any questions or comments out there. Well, I think people are very excited about Tormis. We have our chat. A big part of our chat is members of our choir, and I think some of our most profound performance moments. Some of them are definitely pieces like Laulia, pieces like Incantatio Maris Estosi, which is coming up. One thing I was thinking about is. These are all of these works are very I think powerful in a very visceral way, but at the same time they're very challenging pieces of music, I think, from the audience perspective. So I'm wondering, Patrick, and maybe Eric too, we'll start with Patrick, what kind of impressions you've had from audiences, and especially audiences that maybe aren't your home audience when you perform in your home venues, but if you've toured and you've performed these kind of music, what kind of impressions have you had from audiences?
Well, I think with both of these pieces that you've so generously presented of ours tonight, the Viimane Laev and this, they're so dramatic that as we finish, I can feel the audience and their response to it. And they've always been incredibly well received. And after each of these concerts, whether they've been concerts here in the States or, for instance, we had the Pisa Latania, obviously we had in the Netherlands and in England and Wales. And throughout that entire trip, I think that was one of the pieces that was responded to the most. And for us to have the chance to sing these pieces in Estonia, because our last tour was to Sweden, Finland, and Estonia. It was an incredible bonding experience between us and the audience that we would take the time to learn these pieces and present them. We actually got to sing Viimane Laev and Laulia in the Eesti Concert, the Estonian concert hall, the Carnegie Hall of Estonia, as it were. And that was a real pleasure. And afterwards, our dinner with the Estonian technical choir that we shared the concert with was an amazing experience, sharing their reactions to these pieces that were so important to them. And of course, it was great for us to have a chance to see if our Estonian was up to snuff. I'm very lucky to have Eric, you probably know this book, Mimi Dice's book on Veljo Tormis. Mimi sings with me in Riverside Choral Society in New York.
No way.
So I've had my Estonian coach. Mimi also coaches language at Juilliard and sings in Riverside Choral Society. And I had a fun time going through Pisa Latania with her and recording that. But that was an interesting part of our, for my students especially, I think, and for me, of our learning experience to be able to perform this in the Baltics and especially in Estonia. So the answer to your question, Phil, is that it's been a really deeply fulfilling part of the experience for us, is the audience reaction. So I think the ACDA performance that you played of Viva Laia, of course, they were performing for 2,000 choir directors who know Tormis. That's not your average audience. And it was, after those performances, it was hard to avoid questions about the group and that repertory, because that piece was so powerful.
I have many stories about performing Tormis, but the one I will try to quickly share here is when we commissioned Last Letter Home by Lee Hoiby. We had Jesse Given's widow Melissa come in so we could finally sing her the piece. And Patrick, I think you know the work that I'm talking about. And when I picked her up at the airport, she's like, man, I just want to warn you, I'm not really a choir person. I don't know about choir. And we brought her to one of our shows, and we closed the first half of the program before we'd sing Last Letter Home with Songs of the Ancient Sea. And Melissa told me, she's like, yeah, I'm much more into heavy metal. And I could see she was kind of sitting next to me during the show, and she was kind of, she was being polite, whatever. But when we got to the Tormis, we got done with that. When she looked at me, she's like, that rocked. And that is such a, I think there's such a as Phil was saying, a visceral aspect to this music that I think a lot of people who aren't necessarily choral folks can get into it. I want to thank you, Patrick, so much for joining us and sharing just the beautiful work that you're doing. I really encourage folks to follow and watch the Further Inside with Patrick and get to hear a really wonderful set of Maori songs that he commissioned. I think they're really, really, really excellent, really beautiful. But I want to thank you so much for being with us, Patrick. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate your generosity in reaching out across the country. It's nice that we're all getting good with this technology these days, but you obviously have been at the forefront at Chor Leoni with these broadcasts, and we're very appreciative of you reaching out.
Well, it's nice to connect with our brothers in song on the other coast. So thank you. And I hope we get to do this IRL, as they say, sometime soon. But before you go, I want to introduce our last piece of the evening. And this is one that has been in Chor Leoni's repertoire for a number of years. This is Incantatio Maris Estuosi. It was commissioned by Helsinki University Choir as well as Orfei Dränger. So it was a Swedish group and a Finnish group. They could not decide on which language to do this in, so Tormis said, let's just translate the text into Latin and we'll be done with it. And the text actually comes from the Kalevala, which is the Finnish national epic. And it tells the story of men going out in their boats and getting caught in a storm. And this piece of music is really indicative of Tormis's writing, in which he's taking not really traditional runic songs, but things that are sort of like these runic songs, which are little melody fragments that Tormis uses in these almost orchestral ways, and layers them and builds them up into these really wonderful musical structures. And you'll hear them initially sort of sounding like the waves, and those get more and more violent, and then whistling happens and the wind happens. And just as all seems lost that these boats are going to go over, someone stands at the prow of the ship and casts a spell to calm the storm and to still the waves. This was also written in memory of the Estonia, the ferry liner that went down in the 90s, going back and forth across the Baltic. It was a horrible modern maritime disaster. And Tormis wrote this just a few years after that. So in the inscription is a memoriam to the souls lost there. And I think if you listen at the end with the storm sort of dissipating, I think you can almost also hear a bit of an elegy or requiem for those souls. It's an incredible piece. And this is a performance of Chor Leoni singing in Singapore when we were there 2 summers ago. This is Incantatio Maris Estuosi by Veljo Tormis.
Deus
Incantatio Maris Estuosi, Veljo Tormis, Chor Leoni singing live in Singapore. It's a wonderful time to be had. I want to thank all of you for joining us for this sharing of, I think, one of the most remarkable choral composers of all time. I want to thank Blue Shore Financial for their sponsorship, as well as Tom Kidd. Next week, we'll have a fewer tritones in the works. Tim Schatz from Luminous Voices in Calgary, Alberta, will be joining us and sharing their music, as well as some more music from Chor Leoni. Hope you can stay well, be safe, take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. We'll see you next week.
Boom. Boom, 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 boom. Ooh, yeah, yeah. Boom, 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 boom. They say it's all right. Boom, boom, boom. They say it's all right. Boom, boom, boom. Say it's all right. Have a good time, 'cause it's all right. Whoa, it's all right. Now we gonna move it slow. Up in the lights are low. When you move it slow, it feels like a moan. 'Cause it's all right. Whoa, it's all right.